She told me that this affair had been going on for a really long time, pretty much ever since my dad had been diagnosed. She said I did not know what it was like to have a sick partner, so I had no idea how difficult it was for her, which is why I had no right to judge her for finding love elsewhere. She claimed that she knew she was going to lose her husband at one point, so in her opinion, there was nothing wrong with what she was doing. It was quite pathetic of her, and I told her so. The next day, I paid for it because she told me that I had to leave, and she didn't want any filth from the past in her home anymore. She wasn't just referring to me. She and her boyfriend had started packing a bunch of stuff from my dad's room in the morning, and by the time I woke up, there were a bunch of boxes in the front yard. My mother told me that wherever I was going, I could either take the boxes with me or leave them there so they could burn them, but either way, it was all going out of their house. They gave me a couple of hours to pack all my stuff so I could leave. I decided to utilize my time packing my belongings instead of arguing with them because, judging by my mother's behavior, she was too far gone. I did not want to put down my dignity by speaking to her. We had pretty much stopped getting along a couple of months before my dad passed away because she had been fighting a lot with him, and I did not think it was right to keep arguing with him about petty things and be so horrible to him, especially when we knew that he was not going to make it. After I found out about the affair, I had lost all respect for her, so I was quite glad to be leaving. I made a few phone calls, and after some time, my girlfriend told me that she could speak to her parents and let me stay with them for a couple of weeks until I got back on my feet and made some other arrangements. I am very grateful for that since I've been living with them ever since my mother kicked me out. They've been very kind, especially my girlfriend, since we've only been dating for 3 months, and she really didn't need to do this, but I'm very thankful for her. Anyway, on the day that I left, along with my own belongings, I also took the boxes that my mother had thrown out, which were full of my dad's belongings. I figured that I definitely could not let them burn it since that would mean losing the last bit of whatever my father had left behind. It ended up with my room being extremely cramped because of all the stuff that was in there, but it was worth it. For the past couple of days, I had been avoiding even looking at those boxes, let alone going through them. The reason for that was quite simple: it reminded me too much of my dad, and I was just not ready to go through it. I knew that it would end up with me crying on the floor because I missed him so much already, so I had been avoiding. But 2 days ago, I made up my mind that I was going to go through some of the boxes, no matter how hard it was, and I got incredibly lucky because the first box that I picked was full of documents and paperwork from my dad's room. Before he was moved to the hospital in the last few weeks of his life, he was working out of his room in the house since he was in no shape to go out every day. My father was working as a tax consultant in a huge firm, so there was a lot of paperwork about that, and I didn't understand most of it, so I just kept it aside. I kind of made my way to the bottom of the boxes, and there I found a blue manila file with my name on it, and that was it. What I found in there is going to finish my mom, and I'm here for it. On going through the contents of that folder, I found out that my dad actually had left a will, and my mother probably had no idea, or maybe she did and just wasn't telling the lawyer. Not just the will, I also found a bunch of other documents, including the deed to the house, which said that it did not belong to both my parents, but only to my father. After reading the will, I realized that my dad had left the house and all the money that had remained in his account to me. My mother had received his car, which was a big deal because my dad drove a pretty nice car, and the ownership of their vacation home. I realized that my mother had absolutely no right to kick me out of the house because it did not even belong to her anymore, or at any point in time. First, it belonged to my father, and now it belongs to me. So far, my dad's lawyer had told me that his assets were going to remain frozen until the court had come up with a way to decide how his assets were going to be divided. However, after I found those documents, I called him up immediately and told him what I had found. I invited him to my girlfriend's house and asked him if it would be possible for me to move back into my own house because my dad clearly stated in the will that the house belonged to me, not my mother. He told me that I was definitely free to do that if I wanted to because my mother had no right to kick me out in the first place, at least not without proper notice. That was all that I needed to know. He could deal with the execution of the will, but I was going to deal with the situation with my mom. I called her up immediately afterward and told her that I had found out about the will that my father had left. He had stated that the house was going to be left to me, and so was all the money in his bank account. She was silent for a couple of minutes and said that it did not matter to her, but I told her that now that the tables had turned, I wanted her to leave the premises because the house had never really belonged to her, neither had she ever done anything to earn it. She had been horrible to my dad, and now she was being horrible to me, so I told her that I wanted her out by the end of this week. That's when she started crying. To be honest, I had actually expected her to start arguing with me because that's how she has always been, argumentative and rude to everyone around her. Instead, she started begging me not to say anything or do anything because she had convinced her boyfriend to move in with her by telling him that she would handle everything for him. Apparently, her coworker had also been married but had recently filed for a divorce, and his ex-wife was demanding a huge amount of alimony, which was fair enough because he had cheated. So, he had been worried about it, and my mother had told him that she would handle it all for him, which meant that she would let him stay with her so he did not have to worry about where he would live or about rent and other miscellaneous expenses. He could just focus on his divorce. Now, if I came up to them and said that the house did not even belong to her, she would be messed up.